Welcome everyone to the Wisdom Wednesday event hosted by the Center for Student Involvement. We have a guest with us today, Dr. Chardie Baird. She's a professor of sociology here at K-State and is also the executive director of the K-State Advancement of Women in Science and Engineering Office, or KAWSE as it's called. And she's going to chat with us about finding peace by prioritizing and persisting through challenging times, including while fighting for social justice, and just other wisdom that she's learned through her leadership journey as well. Dr. Baird has more than 15 years of experience as a college professor and about a decade of experience leading an office that's devoted to fostering diversity and inclusion and equity change in higher education. So Dr. Baird, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me and inviting me, Ms. Hyman. And for all of you in the audience, thank you for being interested in hearing what I have to say. It was really nice, kind of a gift to have a chance to reflect on what I'm doing, just for me, give me a chance to do that. But it's also lovely to have a chance to share what's worked for me, worked for what I've learned from other people. And sometimes I think I've learned, they were gracious to share with me their mistakes and I learned from their mistakes. And so that's always useful. And even if what works for me doesn't work for you all, hopefully it will spark something that does work for you. There'll be something that it makes you think about that gives you a way forward that's nice for you. So my plan here is to first just talk about my emotional experience with social justice work, and then talk about two kind of guiding principles that help me when I feel like I'm struggling, and some examples of times that I drew on those guiding principles that helped me feel peace. So my emotional experience with social justice work is, because it's slow work, but then you just hear this all the time, oh, it's slow, you make gradual process, but the needs of it are so urgent. I always feel impatient and anxious and frustrated with that. I kind of haven't even accepted that it is slow work. I still don't like that. And so I'm sort of in denial about it. Also, the cruelty of what is leading to social justice work, especially intentional cruelty, is really scary and also heartbreaking for me. Then, it's a roller coaster ride. On the same day, maybe even the same hour, you'll see something really change that you've been a part of for the good for somebody else. And then you'll be completely unable to get something else to happen and you feel like it's a big fat failure. And it's all at one time, right? You can be absolutely sure that something is not going to happen in the way that you think is equitable and fair, and then it does. Then you spent all this time planting seeds, you feel like you've banged your head against the wall, and then something finally sticks from that. You've said it 20 million times, and on 20 million and one, you hear somebody else say it or get it, and it's rewarding. So all of that stuff that goes with social justice work, at least for me, is just a challenge to deal with day in and day out. And so they're like I said, there's sort of two kind of guiding principles that I return to when I'm struggling. And they feel like, for me, that they're undeniable truths for me. I'm not saying they're undeniable truths for everybody, but they're undeniable truths for me. And that helps me accept and move through the challenging times. I don't know, I have when I get to that point with the undeniable truth, when I get back to it and I can sort of sit with it, there's a visceral reaction. It's like an exhale of breath. It's like a relaxation. It doesn't mean I'm thrilled with what's happening. It doesn't even mean I've completely accepted what's happening. But there's a piece about what I'm doing that feels calming. So what are my two truths? One of them came from advice from one of my graduate school professors, and she's obviously a mentor of mine. She told us to pick one thing and work on it. And I think this resonated with me because I had no idea what my job was going to be like, what my life was going to be like, but she did. She had done this for a long time. And she was joyful and funny and smart, and she made a difference for us in graduate school. And I saw her making a difference otherwise, social justice wise. And so I just was like, I'm going to believe her. I want to be like her. I want to do it like her. And so I bought it. And really, when you think about doing just one thing, like when we first said that, I was like, well, that doesn't seem like enough. There's more to do, just one, but there's tons to do with one thing. And for me, that one thing is working for social justice, but my key focus is on women. And I try to be careful that that is not just privileged women. So not just white, middle class, able-bodied, heterosexual, cis women, but that is what I focus on when there's all these competing priorities. And it's still quite broad. If I'm being honest, I had to focus even more than that, or else I'd be all over the place. It's really gender inequality and inequity at K-State. And I've had to even narrow it a little bit more. I'm over an office that does more than this, but what my part of that office is for faculty. So you can see, like, you get narrow and narrow and narrow, and I could probably even talk about like 2 or 3 issues that I want to move forward during my time for faculty. It does not mean that I do not care about other issues or don't think they're important. But if I'm pushed, I will prioritize the gender work, and I will be a follower in other things instead of a leader. I will try to show up in ways that are, I guess I would say, less engaged. Maybe I'll call a senator or write a petition or donate some money, right? It doesn't mean I'm not participating, but my time and energy and effort is going to be more focused on women. Now, I would say a couple other things that my professor, Pat Martin, said that I don't remember her saying, but I have built onto this too, that are important. You've got to persist in this one thing. You have to doggedly pursue it, because it's often just a slog when it's social justice. It's just day in, day out, saying the same thing. And like I've already mentioned what it feels like day in, day out. It's just a slog. And one thing that helps with it just being one thing is that I have knowledge and experience over time to draw on about this one thing, right? So I've heard this point of resistance 40 times, and now I've got something that I say that tends to work. And I even know differences in context about what resistance is, and even the same resistance in a new context, I might know what to say there. And that has just come from one thing, and paying attention to that and compiling that over time. It also helps that, you also can remember the non-slog times too, right? And doing one thing is just a very focused way to do that. The other thing I would say about what my professor said that I added is that even little things matter. My first story that I'm going to tell about in a little bit about these 2 points will pick up on this idea of persisting even when it's hard, and like having this one thing. And I do it in just a little thing in that example, I think. So that's my first one. Work on one thing and focus on it doggedly, persisting. Second is, I do not want my work to be all that I am or all that I do. I don't want to call this work-life balance, because I know a lot of people say that and use those words, and that's not really what I mean. I don't want necessarily work-life balance. I just don't want all of my life to be work. And I love my work sometimes. Most of the time, in principle, big picture, I always love it. some of the day-to-day is harder. But still, academia tends to glorify being busy. I think I'm just speculating here. I think some of that is about people sort of have negative feelings about academics, think we're not really working and that it's easy. So I think sometimes we want to show everybody we're busy, right? There's mistrust for us. We're not lazy. We're not working. It's not an easy life. We're busy. We're working all the time. I think it also, we use it among academics as evidence that your thoughts are in demand. You're in demand. So it's showing your worth too among, so outside academia and then within it. And I think it's a protection too, right? So if you're so busy, maybe people won't ask me to do something else. Maybe I can leave the meeting early because I'm so busy. Maybe I don't have to do such a thorough job. So I think that's part of why this matters so much for me. Academia is a culture of the importance of being busy and importance of spending so much time on your work, and you're supposed to love it so much that's why. And I don't want to be that. Why not? Why is that a truth for me? My personal life experience is part of it. My dad and my grandfather drowned on my summer vacation when I was 9. And my dad had a kind of job that he was just not home very much. And, I was a kid, I wanted to see my dad a lot. And I think I took that away, right? Like the one time that he stopped working, he died, right? So this is something that really resonates with me and sticks with me, that I don't want to only do that. I also always think about the thing that Western Europeans, I think in particular, say about us, that we Americans live to work, but they work to live. And I want to be in the second half. I like that idea of being a whole person, having a lot of interests. So then too, like when, job is tough, things are hard there, you still have these other things going on that you love that help balance that feeling, maybe even counter it. And then, I'm a sociologist, and we talk a lot about capitalism and the challenges of capitalism and workaholism. And one of the questions we ask about that is, who benefits if I work all the time? Is it me? Is it K-State? Who is it that benefits? And it's not going to be me, because I don't love to work that much. I want to have other outside interests. And so those are why that one is a big deal, a big truth to me that I can draw on. Okay. So here is I'm ready to move to my first story. I can pause here for a second though, in case anybody wants to ask me anything about what I've just said. If I can be clearer about anything, I'm happy to do that. I'm not frozen, I'm just pausing.
So at the risk of playing into this I'm too busy scenario, I just had to take the dog out and get ready for this meeting. But can you talk a little bit about how you frame that to colleagues so that it's palatable?
I don't know that I always do frame it to colleagues. I know that when I was in a less powerful position, so when I was tenure track as an assistant professor, I did not. I would whisper it to my closest confidants, and I would say, don't tell anybody, but I don't work at nights or on the weekends. Don't tell anybody. And now that I am in a more privileged position, so I've got tenure, I've gotten promoted, I've got this administrative position, and part of the mission of the office, I think, is to demonstrate work-life balance, having a a job outside, or a life outside of your work. And so I tend to just do it instead of announcing it and deal with the consequences. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, if that's okay. Does that answer your question, Jeannie?
Yes,
Okay.
and candidly, which I really appreciate.
Well, that is the way I go. And I promise I will go a little bit more into times I've used that. in my second story. So my first story is about, this is about the persisting part. It's not really about the work-life balance part. I keep calling it work-life balance. I've already said that's not what I mean, but you get it. So I was on this awards committee for students. And what our job wasn't exactly to rank students like, oh, this is the winner or not. It was sort of like who's up for the award versus who's now kind of eliminated for being up for the award. That was our job. And I was on this committee. There was a person who was chairing the committee, and there were two other people that were also members of the committee like me. And the chair had sent us a rubric to use, right? So it had the criteria we were supposed to use, and we had materials from the applicants, as well as materials from like recommendation letters, essentially. And so we'd all done our rubrics individually, and then we came to meet each other and talk about it and discuss things. So we'd been doing that, and we were pretty much finished. And I looked over the rankings. Social justice matters to me. This is my one thing, right? So I looked at the rankings, and I noticed that we had men on the top, so men being considered for the award, and women out, not being considered for the award. I looked also at race, ethnicity. I think I knew that. I didn't have information on some of the other areas of privilege. So I said, so I'm noticing that we really have men kind of in this top category and women in the bottom. Are we okay with that? Well, the chairperson did not take kindly to this comment. He and I had discussions around these types of issues before, so there's cumulative things happening in what went down. But he turned to me and he said, I'm so tired of you bringing these things up. I don't want to deal with this. And I said, and this is in front of other people, and he was this big and loud. And I said, I don't understand. You seem to be taking this personally. Why are you taking this personally? It's not about you. He's like, I came up with the rubric. And I said, right, but we all filled out the rubric. We all participated in this. We all have implicit biases. This is part of what we do. And he said, I want you to show me where we've done this. And this is where we were. I was junior to this person. They had decisions for me about my promotions coming forward, and it was unnerving. And so I did it on the fly. Okay, I got to do this now. I brought it up. Now I got to say something. And I said, okay, well, so this guy and this woman, I see what we talked about with them is they have incompletes in a class. I don't remember us saying that she had more incompletes than him, or us saying that she had them in more important classes, like required classes for her major or something. Like, I don't remember that being a part of the discussion. So to me, if we don't have that information and the reason why we did this and these incompletes, she should be up here. And we moved her up. Then I said, okay, felt like I was on a roll. I was like, okay, so this guy who's in the top and this woman who's in the bottom, like, we had information about him having a need, and we counted that as being important, right? Like, his need was important in putting him into this category. And we knew that earlier, but we have since learned that she has the same need. So if the need is the criteria, and this is what we're saying, then she should be there too. And we moved her up. And I said, we also need to consider the fact that there are groups of people who tend to feel more comfortable sharing this kind of information. And it usually tends to be more represented folks compared to underrepresented folks. And one of the things we need to do as this awards committee moving forward is making sure people know that need is a criteria and that we want to hear about it and we want you to tell us, and it's okay and it's not going to be held against you. So I ended up getting, this is a small thing, right? in my view, a small day-to-day, everyday living thing. But I got 2 people moved up based on criteria that were fair and maybe, raise some issues for the future on the awards committee. So, this is about social justice, right? This is my one thing. So I'm on this awards committee, and so I'm trying to do something even there, right? It's the thing I bring. It's my lens that I'm focusing on the most. I persisted even when it was hard. There was the anger of this chairperson. It was we had cumulative issues going on. It was another fire I threw on things. I wasn't, at his same rank, and he eventually would be making decisions about my promotions. So that was scary. I had no support, verbal or otherwise, from anybody on that committee. They froze. I mean, when I looked at them, they were like this, right? So I was on my own. I always kind of I don't know if any of you are Harry Potter fans, but if you are, I'll tell the story, but you'll still get the message if you don't know. In the first book, Neville Longbottom has to stand up to Harry Potter and Hermione and Ron Granger, and he does it. And at the end, they get points in the awards, and by the proctor of the school. And he says, and to Neville Longbottom, we give you so and so many points, because even though it's always hard to stand up to your enemies, it's even harder to stand up to your friends. And I often think about this. I don't know that I think about the people on the committee as my friends, exactly, but they're colleagues. They're people I respect their work, and I, admire their work. And so it's hard for me. It was hard for me to do it in this environment, and say something. And then after this happened, I talked with one of the people on the committee who was my confidant, a friend of mine, somebody I trusted to give me feedback. And I asked her, so, it was a tense discussion, right? And the person was big. I said, what do you think I could have done in this situation to make a difference, to make him less upset or try to, have a different impact? And they said, well, it was really your tone. Your tone was a little harsh. And it really wounded me. I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but there's sexism for women, right? There's tone policing, right? So what I did is match his tone, right? Or at least I didn't shrink from his tone. I don't know that I exactly matched it. He was going pretty hard. I don't know that I matched that. But I didn't back down. And I was very assertive, which women tend to allowed to be, quite honestly. And, this person saying that to me, she's not a scholar of gender inequality, right? I mean, I opened myself up to be vulnerable and ask her what I could have done. And she did something that added to my frustration. So I think, even though I tell the story a lot because it was a success, I got things that helped 2 people. It was hard. It was a challenging thing to do. I think it had long-term consequences for me. Not just that, but the accumulation of it. And it affected one of my relationships with a colleague that I trusted. They weren't someone I could go to around gender inequality issues any longer. And I wanted that. So I still find peace in it because I did the thing I believe in. I did the social justice piece that I believe in, and I stood by it, and I persisted despite it being hard. And again, it doesn't mean I love what happened. It doesn't mean that I'm over it exactly, but I, at my core, am at peace with the fact that I raised that issues because it's my one thing. It's my one thing, and I did it anyway. So now my second story. Anybody want to ask anything about that first one? No pressure. I'm happy to stop and talk about it a little more if you'd like. All right, I think we're ready for story 2. That's what the vibe I'm getting. So my second story is more about work life. What do I want to call it? A life outside of work. So there are 2 time points that this happened in particular, I would say, and it was my first year of graduate school and my first year of being an assistant professor. So kind of at the bottom of the academic hierarchy, if you're not familiar with it. And I'll say I still find this to be a daily thing I have to do. But I'm sorry. Okay, yes. In my first, I did see the chat. So I'm going to stop looking at the chat because I'm totally not doing what I'm supposed to do. Bye, Jeannie.
Sorry.
Okay, this is why I said I wasn't going to monitor the chat, because I did not grow up in the generation where you could do like 8 things at one time. Okay, first year of graduate school, first year of assistant professor job. So, entry level job. And I still feel like it's a daily decision. I was working all the time, all the time. I literally wrote, we had to read an article and I had to present on it. And it was an article written at a pretty high level, higher level than I was used to reading, and like with words I didn't know. I literally rewrote the entire article by hand, interpreting it to try to understand what to do. This is like, hours worth of work. And this was the kind of thing that I was doing in that first year of graduate school. And my first year of my assistant professor job, it was all the time. I would come home on Friday nights and let's go out to dinner and go to a movie with my husband, right? And I would fall asleep on the couch every single time at 8 o'clock. And my husband would be like, do you want to come into bed? And like, he stopped asking because it was like the devil arrived, right? No, don't wake me up, right? And it was all weekend. It was all holidays. It was all day, all night, right? Like back to work after. And I was miserable. I've always had this thing about having a life outside of work. And I remember my husband and I, when we were first meeting each other, we met in graduate school. And so he met me in my first year of graduate school. I remember, you're introducing yourselves and you're telling each other like who you are, right? And he was like, I'm not all that into sports, he says to me. And I say, I'm not all that big a crier, right? And I make fun of him a little bit because I think his reference group was different than mine about how much sports you like, right? Like my reference group was like me, who doesn't watch any sports, and his reference group is like face painters. Okay, moving on. But for me with the cry, I'm not a big crier. I cried all the time. I was miserable. I was working too much. I didn't have anything outside. And this was one of my key values, right? So I don't remember exactly when this happened in my first year. I mean, this just wasn't sustainable. One, in general, I don't think this is sustainable for most anybody. And it really competed with a value of mine that's important. So I couldn't keep it up. So some point in that first year, I think maybe after the first semester, I just decided I'm not going to work at night and I am not going to work on the weekends. It doesn't mean I don't make exceptions here and there, but that is the core. The most part, I don't do that. And I promised myself, despite all this time I had spent trying to become a professor, how much I wanted to become a professor, I promised myself that I was willing to accept the consequences of this. If I did not make associate professor, if I did not get tenured, I didn't move up, I would have to find something else to do because this was just too important to me. And again, it doesn't mean, like every day I'm so clear on this that it's no big deal and I don't have any guilt. I mean, I want to be a perfectionist. I don't believe I could be perfect, but I have the tendency to want things to be really, really good, as good, almost as perfect as they can be. I want to be reliable for people, show up when I say I'm going to do, do what I say I'm going to do. But I can say to myself, do you want to give up your leisure time, your rejuvenation time, so that this can be perfect? And whenever I ask that question, I can always say no. At my core, it's right here. I can breathe and I can say, I can always say no. I think because of that, I'm able, I said I like to be reliable for people and show up for people, and do what I say I'm going to do. And I think in line with my one thing, this allows me also to weed through things that come at me, right? So I end up only saying yes to the things that I know I can do. And I don't say yes to things if I don't think I can do them in my time. And so therefore I do actually meet my value, because I don't say yes to things that I know that I can't do, because I'm going to make these two, this rule: no nights and weekends. There are other things I do around work-life stuff, of course, that it's not just that one thing, but that's a big deal to me. The email wall makes a difference for me in particular. So let me see. Even though this is not part of my true story, I had one other thing that I felt like I just had to say, even though it's going to be a bit of a non sequitur, about work in social justice. And it's not a very exciting thing to say. It's the slog part of what I talked about in terms of working for social justice. And it would be, know the policies of a whatever bureaucracy or big place you're working against. Do not trust the people in power know those policies or will interpret them incorrectly, whether that's intentional or not. I have had to find out and teach policy to people a lot. And it's this, something no one had ever said to me. And I feel like I learned this is one of those learn from my mistakes. I didn't know this at first, right? And then I discovered that it was important to, they say there's this policy, find said policy, look at said policy. Often they're just not right. Again, intentionally or not. So random non sequitur, but something that I wanted to say. So I am completely open for questions, comments, your experiences too. I'm happy to hear about your stories and what works for you too.
Chardie, after your first story, we did have a question in the chat, so let me read it to you. Bethany asked, how would you recommend talking to friends and colleagues about things like tone policing when they bring it up in a way that needs to be called out, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, well, I am continually grappling with this issue. The big picture for me, I would like to see all of us as a culture become better about hearing things said to us that are being said to us in anger and frustration, and not getting defensive and just sort of, I'm not saying violent so many times, but somebody coming to you angry with you, mad at you, mad because what you've said or done is linked to a bunch of other things. And I would like to see us be better about that. Having said that, not many people are. And certainly, when you're trying to change someone's mind, coming in hard doesn't usually work, particularly given our culture, particularly around sexism and racism, right? We treat those things as if we are a bad person, even though as a sociologist, it probably won't surprise you, it's much harder than that. It's much more pervasive and widespread, and we do it even when we don't want to. So it's not necessarily about us being a bad person. I might say if, once you have learned that you're doing sexist and racist things and you just keep going, maybe then we're in the bad person. I'm willing to call you a bad person then. But so one of the things that, if you have it, okay, first I would say you need to assess where this person is in the likelihood that they're going to hear you. It doesn't mean that you don't say anything to them, but if you assess where they are beforehand, you will be better prepared for their response, like that I got with that person who was chairing my committee, right? It didn't mean I backed down, but I knew that was coming. And that's not easy for me. I don't love conflict. I don't love that kind of, well, body, physical kind of threat. I don't like talking about things and not being supported by my colleagues, but, all of that together, you're just, the preparation for that is a little bit, helps me a little bit. Often people, they kind of have three reactions to being told something difficult. And I think being told you're acting in a sexist, racist way is difficult for people to hear. First, they sort of like, what? Because for most of us, I would like to believe, we didn't say it because we want to be sexist or racist. Like that's something we don't want to be, right? So, and you wouldn't have said it had you known. So if somebody tells you, oh, this is tone policing, right? Your first thing is what? What it is? How, right? So you probably need to be ready to answer that question for this person, right? Then the second thing they tend to do is, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to get in trouble, right? And in our society, it's really bad to be sexist or racist. We don't value that, right? So this is going to be the second thing they come at you with, right? Am I going to get in trouble? What's my reputation, right? And then the third thing they're going to do is, am I a bad person? So knowing that these things are likely to come back, you can be ready to have answers for these things, right? You can be ready to respond to that. So you can talk a little bit about how sexism and racism is so pervasive. You can provide examples of that if you wish. One of the things I often say is like, I do this all the time too. I'll give an example of something I did. And I say, it's not that I think I'm, better than other people, but I hold myself to a pretty high standard because I studied this. This is my research area, but I still do it. And I was like, so I give that example, I try to talk about that. And then the last thing, with a bad person, this also alleviates it from being about you, right? If you talk about how pervasive it is in culture and, provide examples of that, you could say to them, I don't think you're a bad person. I know you're a good person, which is why I even brought this up with you. Now, having said all of this, you can see how much work you have just done in telling them that. And I think back to the kind of work-life thought process, you've got to decide how much you are willing to invest in that person and how much you have on that particular day, I think. You also have to consider power too, right? Like if they're a lot more powerful than you, in a powerful position than you, you need to be a little thoughtful about that decision. It just may not be the time for you to do that. You might find allies that do have more power that could talk to that person about it, that's more on equal footing. And also safety, right? Like if they are violent, right, you need to consider those things. But I think knowing a little bit what common reactions are might help you be a little bit more prepared and know what's coming and kind of get your vibe. Does that help you, Bethany? I see a thank you. Is that what you were hoping for? Okay.
Other questions? I'll ask one while we're letting people think some more. What you said about learning to accept, like you mentioned with perfectionism,
Yeah.
and making decisions that are healthy for you, and therefore then accepting the consequences. But I think even going back to, having a life outside of work and being able to just accept things, or what you said about, making a difference and persisting, even on the days that you feel like you failed, right? Or you feel like you are failing. Do you have any thoughts on that, on strategies you've used at all for that acceptance piece of working through, coming to terms with, this is as much as I can give, or this is as much as I can provide, and I'm just going to have to accept that, right? And find peace with that somehow.
Yeah. So I guess this is a great opportunity for me to also say, right, like this is a struggle for me constantly, right? And so it's easy to be in this space and like, here's my rule, and I just do it, and then I'm always good. And it's not, it's not really like that for me, because I care about the issues. When you care about the issues, you can't divorce yourself from what that feels like and what you're doing, right? I have the things of like conversations in my head with somebody I wish I had said, like I wish I had done, or I can't believe they said that, and then it like reminds me of the other thing, and reminds me of the other thing. It turns into this big spiral. But I do think I've continued, as I've made this more explicit for myself, that there are people in spaces that are ready to move, and there are people in spaces that are not ready to move. When I've been real strategic about paying attention to that and making it explicit and say, all right, they are just not going to do it. It doesn't mean I have to stop working on this. I'm just not going to work on it here. Just not going to work on it here. And then you work on it in a space where people are responding, and that is rejuvenating, right? And you never know, maybe because you worked on it over here, this is going to just trickle right on over to this. They might eventually get to a space that they weren't. Doing this might make a difference. But I do think, and again, this makes it sound like I do this all the time and it's easy. It's not that simple. But when I can say, like, accept, this is not happening here. It's open here. I'm going to put my time and energy here. It is so much more rewarding. And it keeps you going. And you don't have all that, conversations that you're trying to win when somebody's like, I'm just not going to move. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
I have not been great about this. This has been something that's a problem for me. And I've been making it more explicit, I would say, in the past year, and investing my time and energy in creating spaces where there's movement too, and positive movement. And that has been very important.
Well, and I think exactly what you are doing right now is role modeling that it's work, right? And role modeling that you too struggle with this, but also you are aware of this, and maybe the people here joining us today or who might watch this recording later might be like, oh, it's not just me. Because I think it can be really isolating sometimes. And so I appreciate you sharing that and being real with us and being vulnerable with us, because I think that's a lot of times what people need, more so even than answers, right? Or like, here's how you do it, 1, 2, 3. But to feel a connection and feel like, oh, okay, it's not just me. And this is a hard problem or a big challenge for people. So thank you.
That said, I'd say too, that something you said there made me think, like, when one of the things that happens when you meet resistance, and it's even the failures, right? Failures, even when that's the case, you do learn something about what worked and what didn't work. Like I said, as you work on this one thing, you get more information. That's part of it. Like, I now know the kinds of things people say about blah. It doesn't mean there's not a new thing, but I pretty much know. And I have a lot of options of responses at the point that I didn't have before. So even, just engaging with it, even when it was a failure, you often learn something that you use later. So it was somewhat useful.
Other thoughts or questions for Dr. Baird? I'm practicing being good with my silence. Oh, good. Bethany, hi.
Hi. Sorry, I have
No.
another question. So you mentioned when you were in grad school that you decided you weren't going to work after 5 or on weekends or whatever that time was. Did you actually talk to people about that, or did you just make that like an internal decision and then work with it?
I'm trying to think. In grad school, I don't know that I trusted anybody enough to admit it out loud to them and feel safe. I also think I benefited, quite honestly, from the fact that I really worked too much the first year. And so I had like a reputation of working a lot. And so then they just assumed I was. But I will say what, so I don't know, there was a group there. So one of the things people always tell you, especially in social justice work, is get a community, right? Get a community of people that share your same, what you care about, and go to them. They'll push you, and then they'll also be there as allies when you need them. And I was in a group, the professor I mentioned, and then some other people had this Sociologist for Women in Society group. And one of the things they talked about were strategies for having a life outside of work. And periodically this would be discussed. And I remember somebody saying that they set like a certain amount of time for email, and that's all they spent on it. Like a certain time during the day, a certain time, like one time during the day. And that's what they did. And they reserved it. And then that was it. And I adapted that a bit to how I do things. So I do think, again, like I would seek out this kind of place, like the space that Ms. Hyman's created, and then, any place that's in my own discipline, and go hear what people did that were more powerful and could say it out loud. And then I adapted it myself. But I did have to be completely honest. I hid it until I was safe with people, but I did it, but I just didn't bring a lot of attention to it.
Okay. And then as a follow-up, now that you're in academia and you have more power, how do you communicate that to your students? Do you only do it in spaces like the way your professor did outside of the classroom, or do you also do that in the classroom?
I have developed over time to doing it in the classroom. So one of the things I think happened to me, and I think happens to a lot of us, is even though I had gone to college and had college professors and had preferences, when I got into that role myself, I modeled this like image of a professor that it was supposed to be, but it wasn't really what I liked. And so it was this like hard ass, quite honestly, right? Like, take no prisoners, do the work. This is so much work. This is such a, I want to be 3 hours outside for every hour that you work, blah, blah, blah. And I have gotten to a point now where I say, I don't actually want you to work all the time. I have tried to make my syllabus and the work that we do a reasonable amount of work so that you can actually just enjoy it. Like, you can read the whole article and be calm and be not rushed. And my hope is that you will, make time for that and space for that. And maybe we won't be like learning in fear. We'll be learning, just because we think it's interesting and we're enjoying it. And I tell them on the first day, how there's always the like, do you accept late work? What's your makeup work situation? And I've had so many students over the years, because I think how academia is, right, the dominant culture, they'll contact me just like freaked out that they've had something happen to them and they need an exception, right? They need some more time. And they'll, want to prove, like, there's this whole email trying to prove it to me, right? And this whole thing. And I say on my first day, I would never want you to be in the hospital, have something terrible happening to you, and one of the first things you're worried about is whether I'm going to let you make up your exam. It is just not that important. Contact me when you're okay. Incomplete, like I might have to give you an incomplete. Worst case scenario, you got an F in the course. Grades can be changed for years. Contact me when you're ready. Don't add this additional burden to what's happening with you. And I try, whenever I don't hear from students, I kind of check in with them. I see how they're doing, but not in this, like, where are you? What's the work? Like, are you okay? the other thing I've done, I think that somebody else taught me, was making like a makeup day for exams, and you didn't have to ever tell me why you needed it. You just got to take, like, if you hadn't taken an exam, there was going to be this day at the end. And I do say, like, if you've got a couple, if something's going on that you're having a pattern, you should get in touch with me. But that also, I think, shows people that I know you have a life outside, and sometimes it conflicts with work, and there's a way to deal with that that's systematic. So I think those are a couple of examples of the things that I do and try to do. Oh, and I tell them too, like, I don't work nights and the weekends. And so I will respond to your email, but it may be a day or two because I don't do that. And they're like, okay.
Well, I know we're nearing end time. So Dr. Baird, we just want to thank you again for being here and, of course, sharing your wisdom. I don't think I mentioned this at all at the beginning, but I actually worked with Dr. Baird for 5 years in the KAWSE office. And so I knew that she would be able to come and share a lot of wisdom with us today. And I just want to personally say, I mean, you do make a difference, especially to me, the having a life outside of work and the way to balance those things in my life. I definitely feel like I've learned a lot of skills from you. So I really do appreciate you being here to share this with a wider audience, and that everybody hopefully gets to benefit a little bit from this as well. And so if you don't mind, Dr. Baird, I would be happy to share your email address if anybody wants to get in contact with you afterwards. Otherwise, thank you all so much again for joining us today for this. And we will be uploading a recording of this to the Center for Student Involvement's YouTube channel. So if there are people you know who weren't here today who could benefit from hearing some of these things, I have a few people in mind already for myself. You can share this with them and they can view and access it later. So thank you all again so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your questions. And I hope you find your truths that help sustain you, and that you're better at dealing with it than I am.